What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode brought to you by the League FFB. Today, we're going to be talking about my top 24 running back rankings and tiers for Dynasty Fantasy Football as we head into the 2024 offseason. So without wasting any more time, let's hop right into today's video and let's talk about my top tier of running back. Now, starting it off in my S tier, this is a tier of running backs that has 5 running backs total. Those running backs are going to be Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Breece Hall, Jonathan Taylor, and Christian McCaffrey. Now, starting it off with my running back one, that is going to be Bijan Robinson. And Bijan Robinson is a generational talent. This is a prospect who many have been disappointed with the production that he gave us in his rookie season, despite him finishing as a top 10 running back on the year. Now, I do think we should still value this guy as one of the top running backs, if not the top running back in fantasy football, especially now that Arthur Smith has been let go of his coaching duties. I fully expect the new head coach, whoever that may be, to come in and want to utilize Bijan Robinson to the best of his abilities. And with that being said, I think year 2 is going to be a big indicator of what Bijan Robinson will be, but I do feel very good about his future outlook. Now, coming in at my running back 2, that is going to be Jahmyr Gibbs for the Detroit Lions. And Gibbs balled out as a rookie, had the best rookie year from all fantasy football rookie running backs. This is a guy who was in a part-time role and still averaged 16.1 fantasy points per game, which was 8th best overall in the NFL amongst all running back. Now, we do know that this coaching staff does love to run the football. Gibbs plays fast, and he did see 71 targets this year as a rookie, and I do believe that if the Lions decide to give Jahmyr Gibbs even more of a increased workload, which I do think he has built a strong case for that, I do think this is a player who does have the ceiling of becoming the best running back in Dynasty Fantasy Football. Now, coming in at my running back 3, that is going to be Breece Hall of the New York Jets. And after suffering a brutal ACL tear in 2022, Breece Hall did finish as the running back 4 overall this year in 2023, and he was 6th overall in fantasy points per game at the position. Now, I think one of the craziest stats of all of the things that I've seen this year is that Breece Hall was number 1 overall in the NFL at the running back position. And I say that this stat is crazy because Breece Hall saw 95 total targets, and he was number 1 in receptions with 76 total receptions on the year, and number 1 overall in receiving yards with 591 receiving yards from the running back position. Now, Breece was used as a weapon in the receiving game, and I do think that that made up for some of the minor inefficiencies that he put together on the ground. Now, that's to be given. He was recovering from that injury, like I said, but Breece Hall looks like he is going to be a fantasy stud going into year 3 of his NFL career. And now, coming in at my running back 4, that is going to be Jonathan Taylor for the Indianapolis Colts. And after 2 ankle injuries in 2022 that forced Taylor to miss 6 games, he did continue to deal with ankle and thumb injuries in 2023. He missed a total of 7 games this year. However, when Taylor was on the field, he did prove to be very efficient, averaging almost 100 yards per game and a touchdown in each of those games. And I truly do believe that when Jonathan Taylor is healthy, he is one of the best running backs in football. And this is an offense that does like to lean on the run game. I'm hoping we can get a full season of Jonathan Taylor in 2024 where he does show us that he can have a healthy season, but I do think that the talent is just too good to bump him any further down my list. And now, coming in at my running back 5, that is going to be Christian McCaffrey for the San Francisco 49ers. And I'm not going to lie, this ranking feels a little bit criminal after the fantasy football MVP season that Christian McCaffrey put up for us this season, but I do have him as my running back 5 because I am going to be starting to hedge my bets against CMC going forward into this offseason. This is a guy who gave us a year where he went for 21 touchdowns and he gave us 2,000 all-purpose yards. And now, usually selling the running back 1 for someone in the same tier would probably be ill-advised. And when we account for some of the carries that he has taken on this body, I do think that I would rather sell high while Christian McCaffrey is still being valued in this tier at 28 years old, especially if somebody is willing to give me a Bijan, a Gibbs, a Hall, or a Taylor for my CMC, even if it is a year early. Now, moving on over to my A tier. My A tier is a tier that consists of 4 running backs. Those running backs are Travis Etienne, Achane, Rachaad White, and Saquon Barkley. Now, coming in at my running back 6, that is going to be Travis Etienne for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And Etienne's 2023 season was the tale of two halves. In his first 8 games this year, Etienne averaged about 19 carries and 1 touchdown per game. And in those 8 games, he also had 6 top 12 finishes at the position. But in his last 8 games of the season, Etienne averaged 14.5 carries and a half touchdown per game and only had 2 top 12 finishes at the position. So I think Etienne has shown us that when you give him the carries, he can put up these high-end fantasy football running back numbers. But I do think it's kind of hard to explain why his workload has diminished so much as the season has closed. So that's something that I'm going to be keeping an eye on moving into 2024. Now, moving on to my running back 7, that is going to be Achane for the Miami Dolphins. And Achane did miss quite a few games in 2023. Some of them were due to a shoulder sprain, some of them due to a knee sprain. But in the 11 games that he played, Achane produced 800 yards on 103 rushing attempts for a whopping 7.8 yards per carry. And he also added another 197 yards in the receiving game with a total of 11 touchdowns on the season. Now, this type of production was good for 17.3 fantasy points per game, which was top 5 in fantasy football at the running back position. And I think Achane has proven that when he is healthy and has the ball in his hands, he is truly one of the most electric players in football. Now, my only worry with Achane is that coming into the NFL, we did fear that his size would kind of lead him to being a little bit more injury prone at the NFL level. Just a smaller back, it's hard to put up with the amount of damage that you take at the running back position. And I do think that that kind of showed its ugly head here in year 1 as he missed quite a bit of games as a rookie. Now, with that being said, if Miami does put Achane in the Mostert role in 2024, I do think that this is a guy who could be in the conversation for the running back 1 in 2024. Now, coming in at my running back 8, that is going to be Rachaad White for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And Rachaad White is a 3rd-round running back who was forced to sit in the wings behind a Leonard Fournette in 2022. When he did get his shot, he got a full-time workload in 2023, and he did not disappoint for fantasy football. He had over 1,500 total yards, 64 receptions, and 9 touchdowns this year. He finished as the RB7 on the season, and he averaged 15.8 fantasy points per game, which was good enough to put him in the top 10 at the position. Now, White is a favorite of mine going into the offseason. I don't think he's being valued this highly by the rest of the community, and because of that, I think he's a fantastic buy where he is at right now. I do think he can continue to produce at a high level here for the remainder of his rookie contract, as long as he sees some consistency from the coaching staff and the quarterback position moving forward. And now moving on to my last running back in this A tier, it is going to be my running back 9, Saquon Barkley for the New York Giants. And keep in mind, Barkley is going to be 27 years old, and he is headed into this offseason where he is going to be an unrestricted free agent. I think the future of Saquon Barkley is pretty hard to predict at the moment, and his next couple years of production is probably going to be determined by who signs him and how they use him when they do sign him to that team. But with that being said, I do think Barkley will be one of the most sought-after free agent running backs in this free agent class this offseason. I think the team that does sign him will most likely be signing him because they want to use him heavily and they want to take advantage of the talents that Saquon Barkley has. And Saquon has quietly been putting up some great numbers despite being on a very shitty Giants offense over the last couple years, but he has still finished top 10 in fantasy points per game in 2022 and in 2023. So I do think that Barkley still has plenty left in the tank for whichever team he plays for next. Now, moving on to my B tier, this is a tier that consists of 5 running backs. Those running backs being Kenneth Walker III, Kyren Williams, DeAndre Swift, Josh Jacobs, and Tyjae Spears. Now, at the top of this tier, at my running back 10, we do have Kenneth Walker III for the Seattle Seahawks, and Walker finished as the running back 19 in 2023, and he finished 20th in fantasy points per game after playing in 15 games. We have now seen almost 2 identical seasons from Kenneth Walker at this point, his rookie year being the better of the 2, and in those 2 seasons, Walker is averaging 978 rushing yards per year and 9 total touchdowns per year. The issue with Kenneth Walker is he's really not being utilized in the passing game at all. He's averaging about 28 receptions per season, and I do think that Walker is a very talented running back whose upside is going to be capped by his low receiving numbers, and those are probably going to backfield mate Zach Charbonnet, but I do think that Walker has proven that he is a very productive runner, and due to his age, he's somebody that we should still be valuing fairly highly in our dynasty leagues. Now, moving on to my running back 11, that is going to be Kyren Williams for the Los Angeles Rams, and it's pretty hard to fathom the type of season that Kyren Williams put together in 2023. In just 12 games, he went for 1,350 150 total yards, and he scored 15 total touchdowns in those 12 games. And because of that, he averaged 21.3 fantasy points per game, which was second best in the league for all running backs, only behind Christian McCaffrey. And I'm not sure if it is fear of him being a late 5th round running back or the strength of this free agent running back class that worries me about Kyren Williams, but maybe I just shouldn't be worried at all. I think the production says he should be higher on this list, but my brain really wants me to hedge this bet. So this is where Kyren Williams lies, currently as my running back 11. Now moving on to my running back 12, that is going to be DeAndre Swift for the Philadelphia Eagles. And Swift is just 24 years old. He's preparing to enter free agency as an unrestricted free agent here later this summer. And Swift has always been a favorite of the Dynasty Fantasy Football community, especially because of his efficiencies and his uses in the receiving game early on. And earlier in the year in 2023, it looked like DeAndre Swift was going to be in store for a career year here with the Philadelphia Eagles. But unfortunately for Swift, as the year progressed, he saw career lows in receptions, in receiving numbers, and in touchdowns, probably thanks to Jalen Hurts and that tush push. However, he did show that if you give him a larger rushing load, he will not lose any of the efficiency because he did post his first 1,000-yard rushing season to date. And I do think that if Swift lands somewhere in free agency that wants to use him both as a runner and as a receiver, his best days may be ahead of him. Now coming in at my running back 13, that is going to be Josh Jacobs for the Las Vegas Raiders. And this is another one of the top free agent running backs headed into 2024. Josh Jacobs, he did finish the year averaging 13.9 fantasy points per game, and he's always been a pretty healthy running back at the NFL level, only missing 4 games due to injury in his entire career. Unfortunately for Josh Jacobs, a majority of those games missed came this year. Now heading into year 6 at 26 years old, I think we pretty much know what Josh Jacobs is up to this point. And this is a guy who averaged low-end running back 1, high-end running back 2 numbers for the majority of his career. And I think we should be valuing him as that high-end running back 2 moving forward. Now closing out my B tier, coming in at my running back 14, that is going to be Tyjae Spears for the Tennessee Titans. Now I am very excited looking at what Tyjae Spears has the potential to put together in 2024. Derrick Henry is likely leaving the Tennessee Titans as an unrestricted free agent this summer. I mean, hell, this guy said his farewells to Tennessee after the last game of the season, and Tyjae Spears looked very good in limited action so far this year. Now I'm not really sure, and I'm not really a fan of the Tennessee Titans firing Mike Vrabel. I do think it likely adds a little bit more risk to Tyjae Spears just due to the uncertainty of the coaching staff and the possibility of them wanting to bring in their own guys. But Tyjae is a running back that I love making a bet on this year, and I'll likely be making a bet on him in a lot of my leagues this offseason. And I've said it before, but I think Rachaad White's 2023 season is something of what Tyjae Spears' 2024 season could look like. Now moving on to my C tier, this is a tier that consists of 5 running backs. Those running backs being Javonte Williams, Joe Mixon, James Cook, Tony Pollard, and Alvin Kamara. Now coming in at the top of my C tier, that is going to be Javonte Williams, running back 15. And we did expect 2023 to be somewhat of a tough year for Javonte Williams. He is coming off of that ACL, LCL, PCL ligament tears that he suffered in 2022. It was a very ugly injury, and it did force him to miss the remainder of that 2022 season. Now with that expected, that was exactly the case for him here in 2023. He did post a career low in YPC. However, I do think the bright side to Javonte Williams' season is he did see a career high in receptions under Sean Payton here this season. And I think 2024 is going to be a make or break year for Javonte Williams in my book. This is a guy who I really liked coming out of college, but unfortunately, a major knee injury that he suffered did slow the development that we have seen from Javonte at the NFL level. Now moving on to my running back 16, that is going to be Joe Mixon. And Joe Mixon continues to do what Joe Mixon does. 1,000 yards rushing, 375 yards receiving, and 12 touchdowns this year. Good for 15.7 fantasy points per game, which did put him in the top 12 running backs in points per game in 2023. And a top 5 finish overall from Joe Mixon was a very good season. But I feel like it kind of got swept under the rug due to some of the other storylines for the Bengals this year. Now, a lot of people are going to pump up Chase Brown this offseason. I do think that there's a chance that Cincinnati does decide to move on from Joe Mixon, and that might lead to that narrative a little bit, but that would mean that Cincinnati would have to utilize the out in Joe Mixon's contract or they would have to trade him before that June 1st deadline if they wanted to save some cap. While I don't necessarily expect the Bengals to move on from Mixon, as far as the production goes, we haven't really seen anything production-wise to indicate that Joe Mixon is getting worse. So I do think that as long as Cincinnati thinks the numbers make sense, they will want him to be there, and I do think that he will be posting similar numbers to what he did this year in 2024. Now moving on to my running back 17, that is going to be James Cook for the Buffalo Bills. And in year 2, James Cook got a majority share of the backfield. He posted 1,500 total yards, 6 touchdowns. That was good for running back 19 in fantasy points per game, with 13.7 fantasy points per game in those games that he played. Now, Cook has been efficient enough and he is used enough in the receiving game that I think it will keep him as a solid running back 2 on your Dynasty Fantasy Football squads. But this does feel like a Bills backfield that does need to add a complementary piece to James Cook if they want to improve their overall team long term. And I think that's what they kind of tried to do with Leonard Fournette this season. Now, coming in at my running back 18, that is going to be Tony Pollard for the Dallas Cowboys. And Pollard is also the next running back on this list that is due to test free agency later this summer. And unfortunately for Tony, he did have a down year here in 2023. And after getting many managers excited last year in 2022 with the production that he was able to give us alongside an Ezekiel Elliott, unfortunately, he disappointed us in 2023 by posting almost the exact same stat line, this time just as the running back 1 in the backfield with no Ezekiel Elliott. I think Tony Pollard is actually similar to James Cook. I think he's a player that can be hyper efficient on less carries and likely needs a complementary piece in the backfield to help him carry the load. And even though he is scheduled to be a free agent this offseason, it's hard for me to imagine many other scenarios where he is going to get better opportunity than the opportunity he's getting in Dallas. Now, coming in at my running back 19 and the last running back in this C tier, it is going to be Alvin Kamara for the New Orleans Saints. And Alvin Kamara is coming off of an incredible 2023 season where he averaged 17.9 fantasy points per game, but he is now going into his age 29 season. And although I think Kamara can still produce for fantasy, mainly because he has continued to remain highly efficient in the receiving game, we have seen his rushing stats continue to decrease each season over the last couple of years. I think if Alvin Kamara is ever stopped being used in the receiving game, the fantasy football cliff will be right around the corner. And this is a guy that I would rather sell high than wait too long and not get anything for him at all because he has already fallen off the cliff. I also think it's worth noting that the Saints do have an out in his contract this offseason, similar to how Minnesota was getting out of Dalvin Cook's contract in 2023. And now this last tier of my running backs is my D tier. It does consist of 5 running backs overall, and those running backs are Nick Chubb, David Montgomery, Isiah Pacheco, Austin Ekeler, and Rhamondre Stevenson. Now coming in at my running back 20, that is going to be Nick Chubb. And having Nick Chubb this low on my list, it does feel a little bit criminal because when Nick Chubb is healthy, he has done nothing but be dominant for your Dynasty Fantasy Football teams. Nick Chubb had 4 years in a row now where he was ranking top 10 in fantasy points per game, those years being from 2019 to 2022. But unfortunately, he suffered a pretty nasty knee injury this year. We all probably saw the highlight. It was the dislocated knee and that MCL tear that he suffered, and it did force him to miss the remainder of the 2023 season. But I do think that Nick Chubb really does have the ability to make this ranking look pretty silly in 2024 if he bounces back and comes back healthy. But I think I'm going to leave him here in my rankings just because I want to account for some of the uncertainty and the risk, especially because we're heading into Nick Chubb's age 29 overall season, and he is in the last year of his contract with the Browns. Now coming in at my running back 21, that is going to be David Montgomery for the Detroit Lions. And we talked about Jahmyr Gibbs earlier in this video, but David Montgomery also had a very good season in 2023 for the Detroit Lions. 1,000 yards rushing and 13 total touchdowns while averaging 14.8 fantasy points per game showed that this backfield's rushing pie is big enough for the both of them. And I do think that David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs are the perfect 1-2 punch. Montgomery being a great goal line back in this offense and a guy that is probably going to see the majority of his value come from those early down rushing and those goal line opportunities. And with that being said, I do think that David Montgomery in this good Lions offense, now they might lose Ben Johnson this offseason, which might be a little bit problematic, but we'll wait to see how that happens. But I do think that David Montgomery could be a running back too with a very safe floor for your dynasty rosters moving forward. Now coming in at my running back 22, that is going to be Isiah Pacheco for the Kansas City Chiefs. And in year 2, Pacheco did get to see a full-time running back role. He played in 14 games and gained 1,179 total yards and scored 9 touchdowns while while averaging 15.3 fantasy points per game. I do kind of feel like Kansas City could potentially be in the market for a potential running back upgrade, especially with how good this running back class is in free agency, especially because they've talked about needing to get Patrick Mahomes some more weapons. I mean, we know the weapons that are there. There's nothing really spectacular outside of Travis Kelce. But in the meantime, though, I do think that Pacheco can be viewed as maybe a risky running back too on your dynasty rosters, but this is a guy who's going to score a lot of points and is attached to a very good quarterback and a good offense moving forward. And you probably don't have to pay a lot for him if you wanted to go get him in the trade room. Now, coming in at my running back 23, it is the elephant in the room, and it is going to be Austin Ekeler for the Los Angeles Chargers. And have I mentioned that there are a lot of good free agent running backs this year? Well, Austin Ekeler is also going to be an unrestricted free agent this offseason, so he is also going to be entered into that pool. He is going to be 29 years old, and he is coming off of a disappointing season here in 2023, so it will be interesting to see the type of market that Ekeler brings in. But he played in 14 games here in 2023. He averaged 13.2 fantasy points per game, and the big thing for me was Ekeler saw a massive regression in his touchdowns. He scored 20 touchdowns in 2021. He scored 18 in 2022. But in 2023, he scored just 6 total touchdowns, so a massive regression from Ekeler in that category. Additionally, we did see his lowest in rushing attempts, rushing yards, receptions, and receiving yards all since 2020, and he did post his lowest yards per carry of his career here in 2023. Yeah, there's probably a chance that this was a down year, but I do think that the data is telling us that we might have seen the running back age cliff take another awesome running back from us. And now coming in at running back 24, the last running back in this tier and the last running back in this video, it is going to be Rhamondre Stevenson for the New England Patriots. And Stevenson was a favorite of the fantasy football community in drafts earlier last summer, but he did deal with quite a few injuries in 2023, specifically some ankle injuries that did hamper his 2023 production, and it ultimately led to Ezekiel Elliott taking over the backfield as we got into the fantasy football playoffs. Now, Elliott is scheduled to be a free agent later this offseason, and he may or may not be back in New England. I don't think that's necessarily a huge deal for Rhamondre Stevenson, but regardless, I do still think that Stevenson can get back to that 1,000-yard rusher and become a producer again for fantasy football in 2024, especially if New England gets a upgrade at the quarterback position and potentially a Drake May or a Jaden Daniels or whoever your favorite free agent quarterback is. They just need an upgrade at that quarterback position, and if they get that, I think Stevenson can have a good 2024 year. Now, that is all I have for you guys today. If you did enjoy the video, go ahead and hit that like button. It is the best free way to show our channel some support, and it does let me know that you guys truly are enjoying the content. That way I know which type of content I should be making moving forward. Additionally, make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel, and also make sure you are hitting that notification bell. That way you are never missing a new video when those videos do come out, and you're notified for each and every one of them. And last but certainly not least, make sure you are a member of that Discord. There is a free Discord linked in the description, so make sure you click that link, join the free Discord, and talk some Dynasty Fantasy Football with us 24/7, 365, trades, waivers, whatever you got, all off season long. We're in there talking Dynasty Fantasy Football, and we want you there with us too. And like I said, it is free to join, so there is no risk in doing that. But with all of that out of the way, I will see you guys on our next video. But until then, peace out.